I'll never forget the day. Patricia Henderson showed up at my door, her face twisted with self-righteous fury as she waved a stack of photos in my face like she was serving a warrant. The HOA president's voice could probably be heard 3 houses down as she shrieked about property damage and demanded justice for what she called teenage delinquency running rampant in our community. Your son did this, She declared with absolute certainty, shoving a blurry photo of spray-painted fences toward multiple residents, saw him loitering near the park yesterday evening. As HOA president, I demand immediate action and full restitution for damage assigned against my doorframe, taking in her perfectly pressed blazer, and the way HOA badge gleamed in the afternoon sun like some kind of suburban sheriff star after letting her rant for another 30 seconds about community standards and property values. It finally spoke in the calmest voice I could muster you. Might want to check the security footage first. Patricia, the way her confidence faltered for just a moment was almost worth the harassment. Almost my 16-year-old son, Jake, had always been the quiet A, more interested in filling sketchbooks with intricate drawings than causing any kind of trouble, while other kids his age were out partying on weekends. Jake could usually be found at the kitchen table working on his late at start project or studying for his AP classes. That's why Patricia's accusation hit particularly hard. She wasn't just attacking Summer and teenagers, she was attacking my son's character. The vandalism had happened over the previous weekend. Someone had spray painted obscenities on several fences along Maple Grove Drive and tagged the community park's brick wall with crude graffiti. The damage was extensive enough that the HOA sent out an emergency neuter Sunday morning, complete with photos and a promise of swift justice by Monday afternoon. Patricia had apparently appointed herself judge, jury, and executioner. She stormed into my home office while I was on a conference call demanding "I punish Jake immediately." Her voice carried that particular tone of authority that only comes from years of unopposed HOA tyranny. 3 different neighbors saw a teenager matching your son's description near the park Saturday evening. She announced to SIF this was ironclad evidence. He was wearing a black hoodie and carrying a backpack. That's suspicious behavior. Ms. Thompson had pointed out that half the teenagers in the neighborhood owned black hoodies and backpacks. But Patricia wasn't interested in logic. She'd already made up her mind, and now she wanted at least a hefty fine and public humiliation. The HOA board will be voting on sanctions at Thursday's meeting, she said with a satisfied smirk to suggest you prepare your son for the consequences of his actions. We're looking at a minimum $5,000 fine plus mandatory community service, and of course, this will goon his permanent HOA record. It didn't even know we had permanent HOA records. But I kept that thought to myself. The whispers started almost immediately. Patricia had a gif for spreading gossip faster than wildfire in drought season by Tuesday morning. I caught neighbors giving us sideways glances during my morning jog. By Tuesday afternoon, Jake came home from school looking defeated. Momask diff. I did it, he said quietly, slumping into a kitchen chair. Even she thinks I'm guilty. That's when I knew I had to fight back. Patricia had crossed the line by targeting my son without evidence, and I wasn't about to let her railroad an innocent kid just to satisfy her power trip. Wednesday's HOA newsletter was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive insinuation without directly naming. Jake. Patricia managed to imply his guilty in every paragraph she wrote about certain young residents who think they're above the law and parents who enable destructive behavior by refusing to acknowledge the truth. Then newsletter ended with a reminder that Thursday's emergency board meeting would address the vandalism incident and appropriate disciplinary measures. Is spent Wednesday evening reviewing our home security footage. Jake had been exactly where he said he was Saturday night, in his room working on an art project for school. The camera showed him entering the house at 4:30 p. Man not leaving again until Sunday morning for his shift at the local bookstore. But as I stared at the footage, another thought struck me. Our house had security cameras, but so did the community park. The HOA had installed them 2 years ago after a series of late-night gat break-ins at the pool house. If someone vandalized the park wall, those cameras would have caught everything. And made several phone calls. Thursday morning, the park maintenance supervisor, Robert, was surprisingly helpful. Once I explained the situation, as it turned out, that already pulled the footage for the HOA's insurance claim, but hadn't the art about Patricia's witch hunt against my Song of Mean Hour. Robert said, "I'll email you their relevant clips." When the email arrived, I almost couldn't believe what I was seeing. The footage was crystal clear, showing 3 teenagers approaching the park wall at dusk Saturday evening. They pulled spray paint cans from their backpacks and went to work laughing and joking as they defaced the brick surface. The leader of the group, clearly visible in the high-definition footage, was none other than Patricia Henderson's son, Bradley. He watched the video 3 more times just to be sure there was no mistaking it. Bradley Henderson, along with 2 of his football teammates, had spent nearly 20 minutes vandalizing the park. The timestamp showed 7:43 p.m. exactly when Patricia's acclaimed witnesses had seen Jake in the area. A downloaded the footage onto a USB drive and prepared for war. The HOA meeting that night was standing room. Only Patricia had done an excellent job drumming up outrage, and half the neighborhood had shown up to witness what they assumed would be Jake's public shaming. Patricia's at the head of the board table, flanked by her 4 fellow board members, all wearing matching HOA pins like some kind of suburban mafia. She called the meeting toward her with obvious relish, her gavel striking the table with unnecessary force aft. Rushing through the standard agenda items, she launched into what she clearly considered the main event. As you all know, our beautiful community was violated last weekend by an act of senseless vandalism. She began, her voice dripping with false concern. After extensive investigation, we have identified the likely perpetrator. She produced her stack of blurry photos and a written statement from one of her cronies claiming to have seen a teenage boy in dark clothing near the park. The evidence was laughably thin, but the board members nodded along as if Patricia asked, presenting DNA evidence based on multiple witness accounts and behavioral patterns. Webb believed Jake Thompson is responsible for this destruction. Patricia announced a move that we sue an immediate fine of $7,500 plus 200 hours of community services. Several board members murmured their agreement. One actually started to second the motion. That's when it stood up. Excuse me, I said loud enough to cut through the murmurs. So I believe I have some evidence the board should review before making any decisions. Patricia's face flushed red mart. Thompson, you'll have your chance to speak during the public comment period. Actually, Patricia, I think you'll want to see this now. We walked to the front of the room and handed the USB drive to the board secretary. This is security footage from the community park camera. As it shows exactly who vandalized the wall. The room went dead silent. Patricia's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water as the secretary plugged the drive into the meeting room's laptop. Within seconds, the footage appeared on the projection screen. The gasp started immediately. There was Brad. Leigh Henderson, clear as day, spray painting profanity on the park wall. The camera angle was perfect, catching his face in full detail. Asha laughed and high-fived his friends. The timestamp glowed in the corner, destroying any possibility of claiming the footage was from a different day. Patricia's face went from red to white in the span of 3 seconds. She gripped the edge of the table as whispers erupted throughout the room on screen. Bradley tossed his empty spray can into the bushes and moved on to tag another section of wall. This must be some mistake. Patricia stammered, but her voice had lost all its authority. The board members were already turning on her. Questions flew fast and furious. How could she accuse an innocent teenager when her own son was the culprit? Did she know about this before the meeting? Was this some kind of cover-up? Patricia tried to salvage the situation with increasingly desperate as his boys will be boys. She said weakly it was just peer pressure. Bradley's a good kid who made one mistake, but the damage was done. The same neighbors who'd been ready to crucify Jake were now calling for Patricia's resignation. The board member who'd almost seconded her motion against Jake now moved to clear his name completely and issue a formal apology. The vote was unanimous, but they weren't done. Another board member, clearly sensing blood in the water, moved to issue a formal HO violation to the Henderson family. For the vandalism, the fine would be $10,000 more than Patricia tried to pin on Jake, plus mandatory restoration of all damaged property. Patricia tried to object, but she'd lost all credibility. The motion passed 4-1 with Patricia casting the only dissenting vote. The final blow came when the board's treasurer stood up, given the serious lapse in judgment demonstrated tonight. A move to hold a vote of no confidence in our current HOA president. The vote was swift and brutal. Patricia Henderson, who ruled the HOA with an iron fist for 6 years, was removed from her position by unanimous decision. She sat there in shock as the board immediately elected a new president and began discussing additional sanctions against Bradley and his accomplices. Furthermore, the new president, Anne, announced the Henderson family will be responsible for all cleanup costs, which our maintenance supervisor estimates at approximately $3,000. This is in addition to the $10,000 failure to pay within 30 days will result in them being placed on the property. Patricia's hands shook. She gathered her papers, $13,000 in Finn, sure position gone, her reputation in tatters. She stood to leave, but the new president wasn't finished. Oh, hand Patricia, you'll need to turn in your HOA keys and access cards by noon tomorrow. Row, your presidency privileges have been revoked effective immediately. The look on Patricia's face as she stumbled out of the meeting room was one of completed devastation. The queen of the HOA had been dethroned by her own hubris, brought down by the very security system she championed installing. Let me know if you want this formatted for print, cleaned up with proper punctuation, or rewritten from another character's perspective.